Hello everyone, and welcome to the 22nd part of the Q&A in the lecture series True Dhamma, following the footsteps of the Buddha. As always, with me is Saif, and today we answer a few more of the questions that you have sent to us by various different media. For example, Discord, email, or simply in the comment section on YouTube. And if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to contact us again. Unless a question has been answered multiple times, we will do so in another video in the future. But anyway, let us just start with the first question. And today we have a rather long and sometimes very deep questions. So bear with us. We try to explain the words that we use in those questions and everything in sufficient depth that you can understand. And the first question is as follows. What if, with mindfulness, you snap back to reality and notice that you are suffering because you are craving against your current predicament? So you let go of that craving and re-establish the right context of anicca and anatta. Is that not abandoning suffering then and there? It is in my experience. I feel like I can notice craving, and just noticing it, usually re-establishing mindfulness, results in letting go. This is a rather long question. Should you start? Should I start?
I can start, but this is in the context, right, of that. Is it in the context of that video you did on the spotless vision of the Dhamma
I'm
and
actually not
having
sure.
blind spots?
I think it was a Discord question. So it may presuppose some knowledge there. And I think one thing we should explain is how we usually understand mindfulness in the suttas as simply memory, remembering, which is rather important because most people think it's something different. But yeah, maybe explain the context that you remember or think, and then we will see where things go.
Yeah, I mean, the main difference I'm thinking of when it comes to this question is that at the beginning you often have this sort of division between when your mind sort of wanders away and you become unmindful. And then you have to sort of actively bring back your mindfulness. And then, like the questioner says, like, because you bring back your mindfulness, you become aware of your craving, and then you let it go right there. But that it's sort of at least slightly different to the right view, where with the right view, you actually figure out a way where you don't have to keep um, actively bringing back your mindfulness towards it because you've just uprooted your ability to crave and to suffer in the first place. Doesn't matter what happens, even if your mind wanders away, that's still sort of within your knowledge of not self. Before I go further, is that like how you are understanding the question as well?
That is exactly how I understood it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I mean, what the questioner says, it's actually like absolutely perfect for the beginning. Because at the beginning your mind is completely within sort of the domain of craving and you do not notice the craving. You don't have the mindfulness, and you need to set up those skillful habits, set up the vigilance, set up bringing back your mind towards remembering the teaching, remembering craving, remembering restraint, which is perfect. But like I said before, at some point you have to also realize that the practice is not about having constant vigilance all the time. And then the perfect practice is about you having constant mindfulness all the time. The practice is fundamentally about uprooting your ability to crave and your ability to suffer. So the correct practice is actually about, setting up vigilance, so then that you don't have to be vigilant anymore because you just can't suffer anymore. And so for the specific case of this person, that person would have to sort of include their active action of being mindful as something that's also not their self. Because unwittingly, every time you actively bring back your mindfulness to the awareness of craving or the body, or for example, unwittingly, you're actually putting your sense of self first because you have to do it every time. And then it becomes something that you're maintaining every single time. But when you're in seclusion, when you're in non-activity, you can practice watchfulness over the fact that, even when your mind wanders and then comes back, if you set up a prior intention to sort of be watchful of that, you can realize that there's no agent that needs to be involved there. Your mind can actually wander, and then when it snaps back, you realize you didn't have to do that. How could you do that? It kind of, you were unmindful, and then you were mindful. It just sort of, prior conditions were sort of set up because of you've been given instructions, because you've been training. It happens automatically. And if you start to see it like that, and you give up your sense of self in regards to it, then some quite strange things happen, to be honest. Some things that you didn't realize were possible, which is that even when you're sort to say unmindful, it's actually not a basis for you for the sense of self and craving to arise again, because even that's contained within the context of not self, and that's what the spotless vision of the Dhamma the Sotapanna has is about. Like literally nothing is unsaturated with the mindfulness of not self. And then the mind wanders and comes back. None of it was you doing it. And then really, since even when you're unmindful, even then the knowledge of not self does not fade. That's how you become knowledgeable about the path to uprooting suffering. Because then, like, really nothing can change your knowledge of not self. And then you just can't suffer anymore.
Yeah, sounds very good. I think we could maybe go a bit more into the last part of the question concerning suffering and how that person feels like uprooting it. As you mentioned in the beginning, it's usually good to aim for the right view and to fix that one, at least one blind spot that is remaining, namely that you feel like doing your mindfulness. When you do your mindfulness, to that extent, you are your right view is not perfect, so to speak. To that extent, there are spots. It's not spotless. But when you have attained the right view, all you really have to do is remember your right view, remember the way out of suffering. Then there is no suffering anymore, so to speak. It cannot really arise. You just, there might be some tiny grains of sand left due to past habits, and due to heedlessness, you can. I'm not sure if it's right to call it suffering, but to a very limited extent, there is some suffering left. And as soon as you remember your right view, that suffering also kind of ceases. Yeah. So in that sense, Sotapanna only has to remember, and that is the entire practice that he kind of has to do from that point onwards. But as Saif explained before, you have to do a lot of other things, namely work towards that memory before. And once you have made it there, to that checkpoint, you only have to really recall what you have understood. Because when you are suffering and know the way out of suffering, all you have to do is remember how to stop it, and then the mind refuses to go there. Yeah. Anything else you want to add there?
Yeah, I mean, it's true that Sotapanna just remembers it. But I would emphasize that even that when Sotapanna remembers, he doesn't really experience it as like him doing the remembering, which is why I was mentioning that it's sort of it's different to when a Patujana brings it back, mind back to craving. They always do it with the sense that they're doing the action of mindfulness. So there is a slight difference there. But even a Sotapanna, he can speed up his practice by like continually like putting the right effort into the right mindfulness. And that's pretty much it.
Well, you said that there's a slight difference between the remembering of a Sotapanna and the normal remembering, but it's actually quite big. I should have emphasized that a bit more. It's a paradigm shift, the way you remember. So, it's not a small thing. It can be actually quite hard to attain, especially that one, because the mind and remembering and all those things are so subtle, so hard to see, because you've been living with a sense of self for so long that you just habitually look past it and need a lot of abstractions and a lot of undoing of unskillful habits before you can see like that.
Yeah. It's like in the sutras to talk about it as the the karma that leads to the cessation of karma, which is the Noble Eightfold Path, basically, which is only open to Sotapannas. And yeah, it's a sort of thing, like how can me remembering also be a basis for like me not having to do any other further activity. Whereas like normal Patujana remembering activity, that's instead of this karma that leads to a cessation of karma, for them it's karma that leads to the increase of karma. Wholesome karma, but still increase of karma. Like they have to keep doing the mindfulness, and like you can't maintain it forever. The mind is going to wander, and then they have to bring it back again and again, and it's infinite unless you start to uproot it by seeing it as also not yourself. So yeah, big difference. Also slight difference. But yeah, that's it's also something that's more advanced. But that's one of the contemplations you can do for right view.
Maybe one last word on that. It can take quite a bit of practice and setup time before you make it there. It's advanced. Anyway,
Yeah.
as the question is so complex, I think it would be best if the person who asked it would just ask a follow-up question if we missed anything here. And then we can move on to the next one. And the next one is also a bit difficult. But today we have lots of difficult questions. And the question is as follows. I hope this is spelled right. With respect to Citta and Citta nimittas, would it be fair to say that seeing clearly and restraining / non-action from the three poisons are aimed towards protecting, so to speak, against the arisen unwholesome, and reflections or recollections are aimed at cultivating the unarisen wholesome, or I guess also at preventing the unarisen unwholesome from arising, to give both angles there. So, yeah, as I understand the question here, the person in question asks, when there is already suffering, is restraint and enduring and non-action when it comes to the three poisons the right way to go? And when there are no immediate cravings, so to speak, no immediate prospects of unwholesome activity, is then reflection, recollection, contemplation, and attempting to see with wisdom the right course of action. So to prevent and uproot, so to speak, the future suffering. So if I understand the question correctly, it's the person tries to find out the difference between uprooting and managing, maybe, or reducing, weakening. Do you understand the question in the same way? Or?
Pretty much, yeah. But just, I guess, just organizing that within the four right exertions, right, and whether that matches how they've understood it.
No.
What would you say?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. First things first, when suffering and craving are already there, when they are already manifest in your experience, then you have no choice. Then everything you do would be through the craving that you are already experiencing, through the suffering that is already there. In such a situation, you can only endure. You can only restrain any further actions that would lead you deeper into the area of suffering, so to speak. So that is the right course of action. When unwholesome things, unwholesome actions, and all those things are already manifest, that is the right way to go about things. You starve them by not entertaining them further. You rob them of their ground and just weaken your craving, weaken your suffering, weaken yourself, and all those things. And as we have said quite a number of times before, when there are no immediately pressing concerns, when there's no immediate lust, when there's no immediate hatred, then it is a good time to contemplate. Because in the end, the true Dhamma practice is about uprooting, it's about preparation, and it's not about trying to find a quick fix when you are suffering. You quite literally want to be unable to suffer. And that is preparation work, so to speak, and not something that you do in the moment. So your reflections or contemplations or recollections are a bit difficult in this context. It depends if you have already understood to a sufficient degree. In that case, you only have to remember, but yeah. So yeah, actually the distinction is quite good, I would say. So do that further and the arisen unwholesome should diminish and the unarisen wholesome should increase if you do it rightly. But again, you can only really fully do the 4 right exertions in a meaningful way once you have attained the right view. Because otherwise, the route of uprooting suffering is simply not available to you. And everything that you are doing, even the memory we have spoken about in the last question, such subtle things, are within the domain of craving, and thus are unwholesome to some extent, at least when it comes to the eradication of future karma. So, as pretty much always, first strive towards attaining the right view, and then everything else will become much clearer to you.
Yeah. The only thing I would really add is like try not to wait to have to protect against arisen unwholesome. So like Klaus said before, by that point it's sort of too late. First of all, obviously to do any sort of further like deeper contemplation and reflection. Also to like get rid of it immediately. You just have to be patient about it. But also like that arisen unwholesome is only there. It's only arising repeatedly because, like Klaus was saying, you weren't cultivating the unarisen wholesome when there was nothing immediately pressuring you. So that latter part is the most essential part. And yeah, it doesn't even have to necessarily be in like the deeper contemplation stuff. Like cultivating the unarisen wholesome could just be like when you're not immediately pressured, just bringing up the mind of restraint, contemplating the value of it, and keeping in mind um, the danger of sensuality, the danger of ill will. So that yeah, when something nice comes your way, and normally you'd crave for it, the mind has already been set up in advance to see the danger of it, and then it's easier to restrain. And yeah, so the 4 exertions, they're all linked together pretty deeply.
Those contemplations of the danger and everything, those are kind of helpful if you really understand them, so to speak. So then you just have to remember them in the future when the situation arises. So that is your mindfulness, memory of such danger as an example. I think that is really a problem. It is really unfortunate, the translation of mindfulness as mindfulness, of Sati as mindfulness. That can be a double-edged sword, in my opinion. In many situations, I think it would be better to just translate it as memory or recollecting or something like that. But yeah, in other cases, it's probably not so good. Probably someone has thought about that before. But yeah. Anyway, anything else on that question, or should we move to the next
one? We can move to the next one.
Perfect. Let's see if it's another deep question. The next question, the next person wants to know: is there a center to womb attention / Yoniso Manasikara? I have an implicit wrong view that it originates from the mind, kind of like an inversion of my head, centered in my head or behind the eyes. So in essence, if I understand it correctly, the person is asking if you are doing the womb attention or the Yoniso Manasikara. So because it originates from something, and that something is very likely yourself. But there could be misunderstanding here. I think it's your question.
Yeah, I think so. It kind of reminds me of all the sort of those contemplations which are aimed at creating like a sense of like the watcher.
Mm-hmm.
So like instead of getting caught up in your feelings and your perceptions and your thoughts, you sort of watch them from a distance. And it can seem like womb attention, as in like attention towards the background of your experience, basically, can be akin to that, developing this sort of sense of the watcher. And it can be something like what the questioner said, like it could feel like, you're watching something from the perspective of like the inversion of your head, like something behind your eyes, or it can be like sort of like from the middle of the body. Or if you're like developing like a really strong restraint, it can be like just, um, you know, transcending your body altogether, sort of thing. Can be like just feeling like consciousness is the center, from which you watch things. But fundamentally, warm attention is not that. That's literally the whole point of warm attention, is that it doesn't matter what center you find. Warm attention makes it so that you try to see what's behind that, basically, behind you, and which undermines your sense of centeredness and sense of self, basically. So even if you find some perception of some standpoint from like behind the mind, so on, when you can watch things, you should try to get behind that by trying to see that, you can only even perceive that in the first place because this body, for example, is already here. Or, even as you're listening to this talk, or you're watching this Dhamma talk, whatever, yeah, you can be mindful that like you can only listen to what we're saying, you can only contemplate it, you can only think about it, because the body is already here as a basis for that. And even my perception of the body, if I attend to it or perceive it, is on the basis of the body. So you see that like whatever you're trying to attend to, whatever you find, whatever you see in your experience, you're always trying to uproot your tendency to find it as a center, as something that's not dependent. And that's what warm attention is. And you have to just keep, it is a gradual process before it's fully saturates your experience. And it is likely that you will find like different centers as you keep progressing, but you just have to keep, again, attending towards the warm further and further. That's what practicing in accordance with the Dhamma as a factor for stream entry. That's what it means. That's what the Buddha says. Like you keep focusing on the impermanence of the aggregates. You keep developing it, pursuing it further and further on the basis of calm and restraint, obviously. But yeah, you have to keep doing that until at some point the spotless vision will arise, and you'll see, as the Sotapanna says, everything that arises is subject to cessation. Literally everything. There's nothing that's not saturated by that knowledge.
I think for those people who also listen to the Hillside Hermitage, what Saif pretty much just described is the also including within that they often mention on the channel. So whenever you find a supposed new center of your experience, you just also include it within the womb of your experience that you have chosen, which could be the body, which is a very good one that the Buddha used quite often. But there are many things. Pretty much every subject that the Buddha gave, every contemplation, when it comes to dependent origination, serves as a good womb. It kind of depends on what you're inclined towards. But I think for most people, tackling the topic through the six senses / the body is a very good and immediate way to go about things. And as long as you do that, so whatever center you find, you see it within that womb. At some point, there is nothing that is exempt, and at that point, it becomes spotless. Clicks on the mind, and you notice, oh, nothing is exempt from it. Yeah, I think that's a very good answer. Let's move to the next question. We have quite a bit of time today. Okay, I think part of that question is cut off in the video, but that's fine. I will just read it because it's so long. The person wants to know, as I have understood it so far, the issue with sensuality is not in the sense objects themselves, but in our relationship to them. So when we become liberated, we no longer crave the sense of the objects and hence cannot suffer. But wouldn't that mean that engaging in eating a slice of cake or engaging in sex as an Arahant wouldn't be an issue because you would still enjoy it because it is pleasant, but not overindulging because craving is no longer there? I don't see why that would be an issue. So the person in question wants to know why a person who is liberated cannot engage in sexual activity, why a person who is fully liberated cannot pretty much have a mind that craves, so to speak. And for that, you pretty much have to understand what gratification there is in such things. So what is the actual gratification, for example, in sex? What is the actual gratification in eating a tasty cake? Where does it begin? Where does it end? So is it about the object? Sometimes there are agreeable sense objects. Or is it literally in your attitude, so to speak? And in the case of pretty much everything that is sensual, there is a lot of danger in engaging in such things and very little gratification. The Buddha did acknowledge that there is some gratification in it, but it's not much. And in the end, it's literally not worth going for things. What comes to mind is a sutta where the Buddha compared the gratification that a noble one experiences to the gratifications that a Pitujana experiences. And he compares it to a child playing with feces. The child does get some gratification from that. There is some. It's not very nice. It's very primitive, but there is some gratification in it. And you simply grow out of that kind of gratification, and you understand that there is something better. That is that it's not worth going to that kind of gratification again. And as there actually is a lot of danger in it, it's much better to avoid it. And maybe one more thing, sex and all those things kind of do depend on your intention. I think in the suttas there are cases where monks and nuns have been raped as an example that people often bring up, so that the biology is still intact and everything. But in the end, it is always about intentionality. Anything that comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think focusing on intentions is basically the main thing. So, in terms of like the sense objects themselves, like staying and only our relationship to it changes. Like for example, in the question of sex, like a person you find attractive would, that would stay in the world. You can't like stop seeing them, and that's not a problem. And the agreeableness of that is not a problem. But an Arahant cannot engage in like sexual intercourse because, like, even though there's an attractive person there, the further engagement then, if there's engagement there, it has to be based in lust, which means an Arahant could not do it. And that's why engaging in sex is like impossible, because you can't engage in sex without that lust being there. It's not just like a pleasantness or sense object type of thing. You can engage with it without lust. And even like as you practice, as you further practice, you'll have to sort of see for yourself basically the extent to which your actions are just pure like agreeableness, or if they're actually based in lust and greed and so on. And you would realize probably that like a lot of actions that you do, they are just based in greed and nothing else. And if you see greed as dangerous, as like as based in resistance to what is present, as that resistance being painful, then yeah, you don't really mind when, for example, you see that vast amount of engagement with company. It's most of the time just out of either distraction or lust and greed. Um, so yeah, a lot of those things just become unavailable to you if you give up lust, because exactly what you change in the relationship. That's what it is basically.
Yeah, and when it comes to wisdom, it kind of is impossible to satisfy cravings for good, so to speak. So once you understand that, it kind of, well, of course, with lots of training and a lot of drilling, it becomes impossible to engage with certain things because you realize that it is pointless, that it's not possible to ultimately satisfy that. Until then, you will probably become heedless quite often, but ultimately, it's impossible, and hence wisdom can liberate you.
Yeah, there are certain things like, for example, like if you're an Arahant and you're in like a nice like forest or something, and like we said before, the sense objects stay and there's agreeability to the forest. Like yeah, the pleasantness of that is fine because it's not a basis for craving, and you can't crave for that. But things that you're mentioning, like a slice of cake, you just can't engage with that unless there's a basis of lust there. Um, so it's two very different things.
That's it.
And I would,
Yeah, sorry.
I was just gonna say, as good, I would edge if you're not sure. I would edge more toward asceticism than to indulgence, because it's very likely that you engage with sensuality more than you think. Like even just, like if you do chores for distracting reasons, that's sort of still within the sensual domain, even if it's not like the same level as like core sensual pleasures. Because you're doing it for distracting reasons, it's within that same domain of craving. So yeah, even small things like that are still um, sensual, so to speak. So
Mhm.
I would try to discern that the degree to which your actions are based on lust.
Mhm. And the Buddha said so. A man's sensuality is in his intentions, in his lustful intentions, so to speak. The problem is that most people have a very different understanding of what sensuality even is. It is already very good if you think that sensuality is not in the sense object. That is already a big step in the right direction, but it does not stop there. You really have to refine it and really have to understand craving fully in its entirety. And only then, when you have left that behind, is the path really available to you. Anyway, I think we have about 8 more minutes for another question. Let's have a look if the next one is okay. And I think it's short, so we can include it in this video. Now, the person in question wants to know, why should we trust that what you say when why should we trust what you say when there are trusted teachers and masters, and for example the forest traditions, I remember the question, who teach differently? And this question is, what's that?
Uh, I think it's mine.
Yeah.
Um,
Why should anyone listen to us here?
it's a very good question, isn't it?
It is.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think if you're just starting off in like Buddhism, it's probably a very good thing not to trust us. Probably because, like, yeah, you would probably go towards what is most respected, um, what is most agreed upon. Um, and if you start out, even if you find something that it seems like it makes sense, but it departs a lot from what is the mainstream tradition, naturally you will have a lot of doubt about that sort of minor tradition. So the vast majority of people will have to go through the mainstream tradition first. And yeah, if you find like party from that, then perfect. But uh, a lot of people don't, or even they get what those teachers are saying, like they practice first, second, third, fourth jhanas or formless liberations, according to what certain teachers say. You do practice insight according to what teachers say. You even get like fruitions and so on, according to what they say. But you're not free from sufferings. uh, then yeah, then you have a basis to start to go towards minor traditions, or someone might become disenchanted with like sutras altogether. They might try to go towards Mahayana or the Tibetan tradition, wherever it is. Once you become disenchanted with the mainstream tradition because you don't find what you're looking for in there, that's when you can be opened up to um, what different teachers say. Um, and especially if you're reading sutras and you're going through the mainstream tradition, I think it is quite common. You quickly start to realize like a lot of what is being taught, it doesn't seem to match up exactly with what the sutras are saying. I remember for me, one of the big ones was like you're always reading the sutras where um, the direct connection between like fourth jhana and arahantship basically is so closely defined. Where it's basically like if you just get fourth jhana, it's so easy to see the nature of things and to just end the defilements right there. But then I'd be practicing fourth jhana according to what certain teachers would say, and it would be bring a lot of freedom, and it would be very pleasant, and it would make me go towards sensuality less. But towards that level of insight and so on, it was very mundane in comparison, and that already kind of struck those light bulbs in my head. I was thinking maybe this isn't exactly what the sutras were saying, and then yeah, can start to reach out towards different interpretations. Until ultimately the threshold, which is understanding the path, going beyond doubt, and knowing what the way towards the uprooting of suffering is in your personal experience, which is always a threshold.
And it's the same. There's no good immediate reason to listen to us in the beginning. And it's very likely, as I've said, a long way of trial and error and being dissatisfied with what other teachers have to offer. Most of the time, people that come to this channel or to the Discord are people who are fairly advanced and have that experience already of being dissatisfied multiple times, of having noticed the differences between the suttas and the modern traditions and everything. And in the beginning, it was the same for me. I was trying to meditate a lot. I was trying to meditate according to many different teachers. And I always came back to the same problem. I was trying to find out in the end what this breath meditation the Buddha was talking about really is. And then I started reading the suttas and nothing. Nothing what those modern teachers have described was in the suttas at all. I could not find a single instance that even remotely matched those modern descriptions on breath meditation. So in the end, I gave up on that path and ordered all the Nikayas and tried to figure out what this stuff is really about. Simply becoming disenchanted with modern traditions, so to speak. And I think that's usually the way people have to go about things to come to more niche traditions and even to come to the suttas. Because you can be very, very advanced in certain teachers' dispensations while never having read a sutta that has not been part of that specific tradition. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else on that question?
Yeah, it's difficult. Like you say, even then, even when you become disenchanted with the mainstream traditions, like it doesn't really help too much. Except maybe now you know like certain wrong views, but then you're kind of in the deep end of ambiguity and doubt because now you're like, well, really, what's what the Buddha saying? And there really are so many different interpretations. So ultimately, the threshold has to be just basically your own experience and mainly like your own experience in regards to having that personal knowledge of this is actually leading to uprooting of suffering. Like I can't suffer in any situation whatsoever, even if those like in the suttas, highway bandits were sawing off my arms. There will be no suffering there. The knowledge has to reach that extent. That's the only way you're going to go beyond doubt. So if you have that in mind, um, that's going to be the most helpful thing to keep pushing you towards what might be the right interpretation.
Okay, I think we are approaching the ending of the recording window. Less than 1 minute left. So yeah, to summarize, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to ask them below. But until then, both of us wish you a pleasant day and until next time.